Nearly $15 billion. Not $15 billion in projected value. Not $15 billion in paper losses. $15 billion removed from a single bank's balance sheet in 72 hours. That number is enough to build 400 hospitals across India. Enough to send clean water to every village in Uttar Pradesh for a generation. Enough to pay the salary of every government school teacher in Telangana for 11 years. The man who caused it was not a managing director. He was not a named partner. He was not someone whose photograph appeared in the annual report. He was a trader whose name most of his colleagues had never learned to pronounce correctly. His desk was on the trading floor of one of the largest private banks in Hyderabad's high-tech city. He came in early. He stayed late. He never raised his voice in a meeting. His name was Suraj Pandey. And before we talk about what he did, we need to talk about what the system did to him first. Suraj Pandey grew up in Varanasi. His father wove silk on a hand loom in a workshop behind their house on a narrow lane near the Ghats. His mother woke before 5 every morning to pack tiffin boxes she sold at the school gate 2 streets away. There was no investment portfolio in that house. There was no financial newspaper on that table. There was a calendar on the wall from a local temple and a list of monthly expenses written in pencil that his mother updated every Friday evening before she went to sleep. Suraj was good at numbers from the time he could count. Not good the way a child is praised for reciting tables. Good the way a mind naturally sees the structure underneath the surface before anyone teaches it to look. He came to Hyderabad at 22 with 1 bag and a job in the middle office of one of the largest private banks in the city. Not the trading desk. Not the floor where the real decisions were made. The back office. The room where other people's trades were processed, checked, and filed. He spent 3 years there. 3 years processing trades executed by men who had graduated from the same institutions as the people who hired them. 3 years learning exactly how the system confirmed a position, how a hedge was verified, how the compliance layer processed each entry. 3 years understanding every control point in the machine from the inside. He never complained. He watched. He learned. And when a vacancy appeared on the equity derivatives desk, he applied. His manager later told him the interview panel had been surprised. Not because he was unqualified, because no one from the back office had ever asked to move to the trading floor before. He was given the position. On his first day at the trading desk, he sat down, opened his terminal, and looked at the screen for a long time without touching anything. He was 31 years old. He was exactly where he had always been heading. He just did not know yet what the floor would cost him to stay on. For the first 18 months, Suraj traded within his limits. His book was small. His positions were clean. His profit and loss record was consistently positive in a way that was noticed but not celebrated. In a trading floor culture where outperformance earned status, and status decided the rest of your career, consistent, solid returns from someone without the right pedigree earn nothing but quiet acknowledgement. His bonus at the end of year 1 was 1/3 of what a colleague with an identical profit and loss record received. The colleague had a postgraduate degree from a school whose name the senior partners recognized at dinner parties. Suraj did not say anything. He came in the next morning at the same time. He sat at the same desk. He opened the same terminal. But something had shifted. The first time he placed a position outside his authorized limit, it was not a large one. It was a directional bet on equity index futures, a market he had studied independently for 2 years, before anyone gave him authorization to trade it. He was certain of the direction. He was right. The position closed in 4 days with a profit that was 4 times his monthly authorized limit. He felt something in his chest he had never felt before. It was not happiness. It was not release. It was the feeling of a room going from dark to completely lit in 1 second. A sudden absolute clarity. The sense that this was the level at which he was supposed to operate, and everything before this moment had been preparation for it. He unwound the position, filed the trade, entered a corresponding fake hedge to balance the book. The system processed it without a flag. No one asked. He waited 3 weeks before placing the next one. The second position was larger. The profit was larger. The feeling in his chest arrived faster and lasted longer. 4 days instead of 2. He began to understand something no textbook had ever described. The feeling was not about the money. The money was real, but the money was not the destination. The feeling was the destination, and the feeling required a larger position each time to reach the same intensity. This is how it began. Over the following 14 months, his hidden positions grew from tens of millions to hundreds of millions. His fake hedges became more sophisticated. He used his back office knowledge to enter counterparty details that appeared legitimate in the system, but referenced entities that did not exist in any external registry. The compliance layer saw a balanced book. The reality was a single massive directional exposure to equity markets moving in one direction. In the second half of 2007, global equity markets moved in exactly that direction. Suraj Pandey made more money in 6 weeks than the entire derivatives desk had made in the previous 4 quarters combined. No one asked where it came from. Profits answered every question before it could be asked. The floor celebrated. His manager mentioned his name in a senior partner meeting for the first time. A colleague who had never spoken to him directly walked over to ask which markets he was watching. Suraj sat at his desk. He felt the feeling. Clean, total, absolute. He did not know yet that the feeling was not a reward. It was a trap, and the trap had already closed. His total hidden exposure by the end of that year had crossed $150 billion. $150 billion, larger than the market capitalization of the very bank that employed him, held in positions that existed in the real market, but appeared nowhere in any official record. His mother called him from Varanasi on a Tuesday evening in January. She called every week. She always called on Tuesday, because Tuesday was the day she finished the accounts for her tiffin business, and the week felt settled enough to talk. Suraj was at his desk. The markets had turned 3 weeks earlier. His positions were moving against him at a speed that no hedge, real or fabricated, could slow. His hidden exposure had grown beyond the range where any controlled unwind was possible. He knew the exact numbers. He had known them for 4 days. His phone lit up on the desk beside his keyboard. His mother's name was on the screen. He looked at the screen. He looked at the terminal. He pressed decline and kept typing. She called again 4 minutes later. He pressed decline again. She sent a message. It said, "Picked up some extra tiffin orders this week. Putting a little aside, thought you might need something." He read the message, and what followed was not a dramatic decision or a calculated choice. It was the action of a man so deep inside a current, he could no longer feel the water moving around him. He placed the phone face down on the desk beside his right hand, and he kept typing, and the positions kept moving against him on the screen, and his mother's message sat face down beneath his right hand, while he continued to do the only thing he still understood how to do, which was to stay at the desk and stay in the trade, and stay inside the only place that had ever made him feel he was exactly the right person in exactly the right room, even as that room was falling apart in real time around him, and the number on the screen kept changing, and every change was a direction he could not reverse. That was the moment. Not the morning the compliance team walked onto the floor. Not the afternoon the risk officers sat him in a glass room and placed printed trade confirmations in front of him one by one. Not the press conference 2 days later. That was the moment. The bank's internal audit team had been flagging anomalies in the counterparty records for 11 days before the case reached the risk committee. When the full picture became clear, the bank chose a fast unwind. Over 4 days, in a market that was already falling, the bank liquidated $150 billion in hidden equity positions. Each sale pushed prices lower. Each lower price increased the loss on the positions that remained. The losses compounded the way a fire accelerates when a window opens. When it was over, nearly $15 billion had been removed from the bank's accounts in 72 hours. Suraj Pandey was suspended on a Friday morning. By Friday evening, his name was on every financial news channel in the country. By Saturday morning, his mother was watching a screen in Varanasi and seeing her son's name beneath a number she had no frame of reference to understand. She called everyone she knew: the neighbor, the woman at the vegetable stall, the journalist who knocked on her door and held a microphone toward her face. She told all of them the same thing. She said, "He worked harder than anyone I have ever known." I asked a behavioral economist who had studied the Suraj Pandey case for nearly 2 years what the first real warning sign was. She said, "The first win." I asked her to explain what she meant. She said, "The first time a person experiences a reward that arrives suddenly and completely, bypassing the normal accumulation of effort and recognition, the brain records that state as a reference point. Everything that follows is the brain attempting to return to it. Not for the money, for the state itself. And the tragedy is that the state requires more each time to reproduce. This is not a character failure. This is a neurological process." I asked her, if the bank had examined his trade records in year 2 instead of year 4, if a manager had asked a single direct question at the right moment, would Suraj Pandey have stopped? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Probably not, because stopping meant confessing. And confessing meant that everything, the desk, the title, the daily proof that a man from Varanasi with no pedigree and no connections could outperform the largest machine in the country, all of it would disappear in one conversation. The addiction was not only to the feeling, it was to the version of himself the feeling had built. There is something in this that goes far beyond one trading floor in Hyderabad. When you find something that makes you feel completely real for the first time, and that thing requires more risk each time to produce the same sensation, the analytical mind is not present in that decision. What is present is the pull, the need to return to the frequency where everything is clear, and the noise stops, and you are exactly the person you always believed you were. Every institution that rewards performance without examining the conditions that produce it creates the environment for this cycle to run without interruption. The silence of the organization when profits arrive is not neutrality. Silence is permission. And permission is the most dangerous thing you can offer someone who has already crossed a line they cannot step back across. Suraj Pandey was not an anomaly. He was the most visible version of a pattern that exists in every competitive environment where who you are and what you produce have become the same thing. Suraj Pandey lost everything the system had given him: the desk, the title, the floor, the feeling. He was removed from the industry. Legal proceedings lasted years. The amount the court attached to his name was a number no individual earns in one lifetime. But every Tuesday, for years after the verdict, his mother sent a tiffin box. She packed it herself in the kitchen in Varanasi, the same container she had packed for the school gate when he was a child. Rice, dal, one small container of pickle. She sent it to wherever he was living. She did not understand collateralized positions. She did not understand equity index futures. She did not understand how a man could lose nearly $15 billion in 72 hours. She understood that her son needed to eat. There is a version of this story about risk controls and compliance failures and gaps in derivative oversight at large financial institutions. That version is true, and it matters. But there is another version. It is about a woman who packed tiffin boxes before sunrise her entire life, whose son traveled to one of the largest financial centers in the country and found, for the first time, something that made him feel seen, who watched that feeling take everything he had built, and who, when it was all gone, sent food anyway, because some people knew who he was before he became what he did, and they still knew who he was after. And I am Maya Voy Wealth, the host of Wealth Paradox Global.